Before we dive into this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because what I'm about to share will change the way you look at the people closest to you. You won't believe what I discovered after my husband's last words. The house was silent that morning, a kind of oppressive quiet that pressed against my ears and made every small creak sound louder than it should have. I had walked into the bedroom with a tray of coffee, my husband's favorite mug balanced carefully in my hands. The smell of freshly brewed dark roast filled the air, mingling with the faint scent of lavender from the candle I'd lit the night before. He was lying there, pale and still, and for a moment my heart refused to acknowledge the truth. "Look behind the frames," he whispered. That was it. Those were his last words. A simple sentence, almost cryptic, but it hit me like a bolt of lightning. I froze, the tray trembling in my hands. He had never said something like that before, not in our 20 years together. I reached out, shaking, to hold his hand, but it was already cold. The funeral was a blur. People came and went, offering condolences, telling me I'd been a good wife, a devoted partner. I nodded through it all, smiling when I should, crying when it was expected. But inside, a storm raged. Those words haunted me. Look behind the frames. What did he mean? What secret was he leaving me with? A message hidden in plain sight? Days passed. The house felt like a stranger now. Every corner seemed to whisper. Every shadow looked heavier. I found myself wandering from room to room, touching the frames on the walls, feeling the glass, the wood, hoping for some clue. His photographs, our family pictures, the landscapes he had collected on trips. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that he had left me something important, something I had to find before it was too late. I started with the living room. The largest frame was above the fireplace, a painting we had bought on our anniversary 5 years ago. It was a serene scene of a misty late at dawn, muted colors that somehow captured peace and sadness at the same time. I ran my fingers along the edge, tapping gently. The frame seemed ordinary, but then my fingernail caught something, a tiny latch hidden in the corner. My heart skipped. I pulled it, and the painting swung forward slightly. Behind it, taped to the wall, was an envelope. I tore it open with shaking hands. Inside was a single note, written in his familiar, looping script. "If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and the truth cannot wait. Go to the study. Look behind the frames there." I felt my pulse spike. The study had always been his domain, a room full of books, trinkets, memories of vacations, awards, and certificates. I had never felt particularly welcome there. It was his sanctuary, a place where I was allowed to be a guest, but never the owner. But now it called me like a lighthouse in a storm. The study door creaked as I opened it. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that streamed through the blinds. My eyes scanned the walls, lined with bookshelves and more framed pictures, family photos, pictures of him alone in moments I didn't know existed, landscapes he had painted himself. I moved from frame to frame, lifting each one, examining the walls behind them. And then I saw it, the latch, just like in the living room, on a large portrait of him and me at our wedding. I pulled the frame forward, my hands trembling, and discovered a small safe embedded in the wall. My stomach dropped. Why would he hide a safe here? What could be so important, so secret, that he had to leave it behind a frame? I pulled at the combination lock, but my fingers were clumsy with fear and anticipation. I didn't know the combination. And yet, as I stared at it, a memory surfaced, a joke he had made on our last anniversary about his favorite number, the one that matters most. I dug through our old anniversary cards, searching, until I found it. 0512. Hands shaking, I entered the numbers. Click. The safe opened. Inside was a stack of envelopes, carefully labeled. Each one had my name on it, written in his unmistakable handwriting. I opened the first one. Inside was a letter, detailed, heartfelt, and terrifying. He wrote about things I had never imagined, mistakes, betrayals, decisions made in secrecy, shadows in our life that I had never known. He spoke of debts, of people I had never met, and of actions he had taken to protect me from the consequences. And at the end of the letter, a single line made me freeze. The man you married was not the man I was, but the man I became, I hope you can forgive him." Tears blurred my vision. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it would burst. I had married a man I thought I knew completely, shared decades of life with, shared laughter and sorrow and children, and now I realized there had been entire hidden chapters, entire identities behind the man I loved. My mind reeled, but even in the shock, a part of me ached with curiosity. I had to know more. The letters were instructions, each one leading me further into his past, his fears, and his hidden world. One led me to a bank deposit box, another to a lawyer's office, and yet another hinted at a hidden room in the house, one I had never noticed, never had reason to enter. The instructions were meticulous, precise, as if he had anticipated my every hesitation, every fear. As night fell, I sat in a study, surrounded by the letters, feeling like a stranger in my own home. I realized that the man I had buried was not fully the man I had loved, but neither was he a monster. He was a man who had lived behind layers, who had feared the world in ways I could never imagine. And now, those layers were being peeled back, one by one, and I wasn't sure I was ready for the truth. But I had to follow it. I had no choice. He had left me a trail, a path to understanding, even if it meant confronting the parts of him that terrified me, and the parts of my marriage that I had never seen. I set my jaw, wiped my tears, and opened the next envelope. The handwriting was precise, almost calm, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions inside me. I was about to step into a world I had never known, guided only by the man I thought I knew, my husband, and his final words. Look behind the frames.
The next morning, the sun spilled into the study in golden streams, but I barely noticed. My eyes were fixed on the next envelope, the next piece of the puzzle my husband had left behind. I hesitated for a moment, hands hovering over the thick cream paper. Each letter was heavier than the last, not just with information, but with the weight of his regrets, his hidden fears, the man I had married, and the man he truly was. I unfolded the envelope slowly. The first sentence made my heart lurch. "I'm sorry for the lies you never asked about, for the truths I never dared tell." His handwriting, once familiar and comforting, now felt like a map to a stranger's soul. The letter detailed financial troubles I had never suspected, a business deal gone wrong that he had worked tirelessly to fix, using money he had hidden in secret accounts. And then, more shocking than money, were the personal betrayals. Old friends turned enemies, a woman he had once loved before me, and choices he had made in the name of protecting me from heartbreak. I sat on the study floor, surrounded by the letters, feeling the walls of the room close in on me. I had married a man who was, in so many ways, a stranger. And yet every word he had written carried a tenderness, a love, and a fear that I recognized. The man behind the frames was not entirely unrecognizable. He was flawed, complex, and achingly human. The next letter led me to the basement. I had rarely gone down there. It was cluttered with old furniture, boxes of forgotten items, and dusty holiday decorations. My husband's letters instructed me to find a particular frame leaning against the wall. It was an old painting, one I barely remembered, a portrait of a house in the countryside. I lifted it and discovered another hidden compartment. Inside was a small journal, leather-bound, worn with age. As I opened the journal, I realized it was his personal diary. The first page was dated decades ago, back when we had first met. He had written about his fears, his dreams, the way he loved me from the first moment he saw me. But as I turned the pages, the tone changed. There were entries about mistakes he had made, secrets he had kept, people he had hurt, and decisions that had haunted him for years. One entry made me gasp aloud. I buried a part of myself in order to protect her, but sometimes I wonder if I've buried myself too deeply. I could feel his despair, his love, his endless struggle to reconcile who he had been with who he needed to be. The man I thought I knew had been living with shadows, and those shadows had shaped the life we shared. I spent hours in the basement, moving from frame to frame, uncovering hidden letters, photographs, and documents. There were pictures of him with people I had never met, in places I had never visited. Some looked joyful, almost carefree, while others carried a tension that I couldn't decipher. Each discovery was a piece of the puzzle, a window into the life he had lived in secret. One frame revealed a photograph of a young boy, no older than 10, holding a dog in a garden. The boy's smile was radiant, but the image made my chest tighten. Who was he? I searched through the letters and found a note explaining that this was his nephew, a child he had cared for secretly after a family tragedy, ensuring he was safe while keeping it hidden from the rest of the family. The thought of him carrying that responsibility alone and never sharing it with me made my eyes sting. That night, I lay awake in bed, the house dark and silent around me. My husband's words echoed in my mind. Look behind the frames. I realize now it wasn't just about physical objects or hidden compartments. It was about the layers of his life, the parts of him he had kept hidden, the truths he had shielded me from. And it terrified me. How well do we ever truly know the people we love? How many frames are there in each of us, waiting to be discovered only when it's too late to ask? The next morning, I returned to the study. The letters instructed me to go to the attic. I hesitated. The attic was always a place I avoided. It was filled with dusty relics, forgotten furniture, and memories of our children when they were young. I climbed the narrow stairs, each step creaking beneath my weight, and opened the attic door. The air was thick with dust, and sunlight slanted through the tiny window, illuminating a large, ornate frame leaning against a stack of boxes. It was a portrait of a man I didn't recognize. He had sharp features, dark eyes, and a solemn expression. I felt a shiver run down my spine. A small latch at the corner caught my attention. I opened it, revealing a hidden compartment, and inside was a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. I untied them, my hands shaking, and began to read. The letters were addressed to my husband, written by someone named Margaret. They spoke of love, regret, betrayal, and reconciliation. My husband had once been deeply in love with Margaret, and she had been a significant part of his life before me. The letters revealed a relationship filled with passion and mistakes, one that had ended painfully but never truly vanished from his heart. I felt a mix of sorrow, anger, and overwhelming love. The man behind the frames was flawed, broken, and human, but he had loved me with all that he had, even when he could not share the full truth. As I descended the attic stairs, I realized that the journey he had set me on was as much about understanding him as it was about understanding myself. I had always thought I knew love, marriage, intimacy, and trust, but the truth was far more complicated. Love was messy, layered, and sometimes hidden behind frames, behind walls, diaries, letters, and unspoken truths. That night, I sat in the study, surrounded by letters, photographs, and journals. The house was quiet, the shadows stretching long across the floor. I realized that the man I had buried was not the man I had truly known. But I also understood that the man he had become, the one who left behind a trail of words, secrets, and love, had wanted me to find him, Even after death, he had trusted me to follow the path he had laid, to uncover the layers, and to understand him completely. I took a deep breath and opened the next envelope. It was smaller, more delicate than the others, and sealed with a wax stamp. I broke it open and read the first line. The final truth cannot be spoken, only seen. Go to the room where it all began. I felt a chill run down my spine. The room where it all began. Our bedroom. The room where we had first met, first fallen in love, first promised to spend our lives together. My hands trembled as I realized that the last secret, the final frame, would not only reveal the truth about him, but also about us, about the life we had built together, and the man I thought I had married. I steeled myself, wiped my tears, and headed toward the bedroom, knowing that the final revelation would change everything I thought I knew. And yet, despite the fear, a strange sense of peace settled over me. He had trusted me with the truth. He had left me the chance to see him fully, to understand the man behind the frames, and perhaps to forgive him.
The bedroom door creaked as I pushed it open. The morning light spilled softly across the bed where he had spent his last moments. Everything seemed untouched, frozen in time. The sheets, the pillows, the faint scent of his cologne lingering in the air. My hands shook as I stepped inside, the final envelope clutched tightly in my hand. The final truth cannot be spoken, only seen. Go to the room where it all began. I walked slowly around the room, scanning the walls, the furniture, the frames. Our wedding photograph hung above the dresser, the golden frame gleaming in the morning light. I approached it carefully, remembering his words, my husband's voice whispering in my memory. Look behind the frames. I lifted the frame and gasped. Behind it was a hidden key taped to the wall. The key was small, unassuming, yet I could feel its weight, not just in my hand, but in my heart. Following the letter's instructions, I traced a path through the house I had walked 1,000 times, but now felt unfamiliar. The key led me to a closet I had always assumed was just for storage. Its door was old and slightly warped, and the lock clicked easily under the small key. Inside, hidden behind coats and old blankets, was a small hatch in the floor. My breath caught. It was as if the house itself was guiding me, layer by layer, into the depths of his secret life. I opened the hatch and descended a narrow staircase, the air growing cooler and heavier with each step. At the bottom was a small, dimly lit room, almost like a secret chamber. The walls were lined with frames, hundreds of them, stacked and leaning against one another, each containing photographs, letters, mementos. My heart pounded. This was his life, all hidden, all preserved, and I was finally seeing it in its entirety. I picked up the nearest frame and gasped. It was a photograph of him as a young man, holding a newborn baby. The child had his eyes, the same dark, searching eyes. A note was attached. I never told you about him. My son, born before our life together. I had to protect him, to protect you from the complications of my past, but he deserves to be known. My hand shook as I moved from frame to frame, uncovering a life I had never imagined. Another frame revealed letters from his son, explaining his life, his hopes, and his longing to know his father. My husband had hidden this part of himself, carrying the burden alone, loving me fiercely, yet protecting me from this truth. The realization hit me like a storm. The man I had married had lived with secrets so heavy, so complex, that I had never even suspected them. And then I saw it, a frame at the far end of the room, larger than the others, sealed with a lock. I fumbled with the keys I had found, and it clicked open. Inside was a letter, folded neatly, and a photograph. I opened a letter first. My dearest love, if you are reading this, you have followed the path I left, uncovering truths I could never speak aloud. The man you loved was flawed, and the man I truly was carried burdens I could not share. But know this, Every secret, every lie, every choice was made to protect you, to preserve what we had together. I hope you can forgive me, and more than that, I hope you can see me, all of me, one last time. I unfolded the photograph. It was him, smiling, standing beside a man I did not recognize at first. But as I studied it, a memory surfaced. This was a friend, or perhaps more, someone connected to the mysterious dealings and hidden parts of his past I had yet to understand. Behind them was a house I had never seen, a place I now realized had been central to his hidden life. And then I noticed something else. Tucked into the corner of the frame was a small folded note. It read simply, "Meet me where it all began." I followed the instructions, my mind racing. The location was familiar. The small park near the lake where we had shared our first date, where he had proposed, where we had dreamed of a life together. I arrived just as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson. And there, sitting on the bench we had once shared, was an envelope with my name on it. I opened it and found photographs, letters, and documents that revealed the final layer of his life. Charitable donations, acts of kindness he had never told anyone about, reconciliations with estranged family members, and even arrangements he had made for my future, ensuring I would be protected financially and emotionally. But the most shocking discovery was the videotape labeled "For her, my love, when she is ready." I returned home, my hands trembling as I set up the tape. The screen flickered to life, and there he was, my husband, speaking directly to me. His face was kind, warm, and vulnerable in a way I had never seen. He spoke of love, regret, and forgiveness. He spoke of the man behind the frames, the life he had hidden, and the depth of his love for me. He begged me to forgive him for the secrets, not because they were wrong, but because they were necessary to protect what we had built. Tears streamed down my face as I listened. For the first time since his death, I felt a sense of closure, a connection that transcended the mysteries he had left behind. I realized that love is not always simple. It is messy, complicated, and sometimes hidden behind walls, letters, frames, and secrets. But the essence of love, the part that endures, is trust, forgiveness, and understanding, even when the full truth is finally revealed. In the days that followed, I continued to explore the frames, the letters, the hidden compartments. I spoke to the people he had protected, those he had reconciled with, those whose lives he had touched quietly. Each story, each revelation, added layers to the man I had married, transforming my grief into something richer, deeper, and profoundly human. I will never forget his last words, "Look behind the frames." They were not just a literal instruction. They were an invitation to understand, to forgive, and to love him fully, even after death. And as I walked through our home, now filled with memories, photographs, and letters, I understood finally. The man I buried was flawed, hidden, and deeply human. And the man he left behind, in his words, his letters, and his secrets, was someone I could finally see, love, and remember completely. Because sometimes the greatest truths are hidden behind frames, waiting for those who are brave enough to look.